Hello everyone! Do you want to learn how to build your own news app in React from scratch? In this video, I will show you step by step how to fetch live news data, display it beautifully using Tailwind CSS and DaisyUI, and make it look professional with pagination and smooth loading states. Let's dive right in. Okay guys, so let's open our terminal by pressing Ctrl and backtick. And now let's create a new Vite project by saying npm create Vite at latest, and I will write dot in the end so that everything will be installed exactly inside this folder without any additional folders. So let's press enter. Here let's choose React as our framework and JavaScript. Here I will say no and no again. So let's write npm install. Okay, now it's time to connect Tailwind CSS to our project. So here I will click get started, then we use Vite, we're in the right place. Then we can skip the first part because we have already done it. So let's copy this command and paste it in our terminal. Great. Now we need to configure our Vite plugin. So let's copy this, and inside vite.config.js file, let's import Tailwind CSS, and inside plugins array, let's use Tailwind CSS, okay? And now we need to import Tailwind CSS. So let's go to source folder, and inside we have index.css. So let's delete everything and paste this import, okay? So now what we need to do next is to install Axios. It's a library which is used to make HTTP requests. So let's install Axios. And now we need to install DaisyUI. So if we go to DaisyUI website, as you can see, this is the command that we need if we use npm. So let's copy this command and paste it in our terminal. Great. It says that we need to add DaisyUI to our CSS file. So let's copy this and add it to our CSS file. So we can do it right here. So let's save this file. Okay. So now let's delete this app.css file, and also I will remove this boilerplate code. And after that, I will start our application. Okay. So now I'm gonna copy this text, and inside index.html, I'm gonna change this title. Great. So now we can start our application. So let's say npm run dev, and here it is. So this is how it looks. Thanks to the fact that here we use DaisyUI, as you can see, our background is dark. And if we remove this plugin, as you can see, it is white. Okay, so now let's close the tabs that we don't need. And let's come back to this app.j6 file. So now what I suggest to do next is to go to newsapi.org website and get our API key. I have already done it, so it's very simple. If you follow the instructions, you'll be able to get it very easily. Okay. So after that, we need to store our key, our API key. So let's create a file called .env in the root. And here let's create a variable called vite_API_key. And we can say vite_news API key. And here we need to paste our API key. Okay, I have already done it. And after that, inside app.j6, we can create some states. So let's create states for news. So by default, it will be an empty array. And let's also import use state. So we need this to store news. Then let's create a state for loading. And by default, it will be true. So we need it so that we will show spinner while fetching news. Then let's create a state for error. By default, it will be null. Then let's create a state for category. And by default, it will be general. So if we go to this website and if we go get started, here we can get additional information about how to get the current top headlines for a country or category. So as you can see, here we need to provide top headlines, then country, then our API key, as you can see. And then example response will look like this: total results, articles, and so on. So in this case, it will be for USA, and then we can also select the source. In this case, it is BBC News. And if we go to documentation, as you can see, News API is a simple HTTP REST API for searching and retrieving live articles from all over the web. So if we go to endpoints, as you can see, we can even search using our query. For example, if we say Bitcoin, we will see the news related to this query. So this is how it will work. And this is how a response will look like. Okay, so now let's create a state for current page. By default, it will be first page. Then for our total results, like total fetched results. And of course, total pages. And by default, it will be 1. Then let's create a variable to get access to our API key. So let's say API key will be equal to import.meta, let's say, and we need to get access to our API key. And then when it comes to the page size, let's say that on one page, we want to see 20 news. Okay, that's great. And now we can create a function to be able to fetch news. So let's say const fetch news. It will be equal to synchronous function. And here we want to do the following. We can say that set loading will be true because it is really true if we think about it. Then we want to reset the error and we can use try and catch block. And in case of an error, we can say failed to fetch news. And then finally, we need to have a state where our loading will be false. Otherwise, it will be true all the time. So finally, we want to say set loading to be false. Okay. Then when it comes to response, so let's say const response will be equal to await. And here at this point, let's import Axios from Axios. So it will be equal to Axios.get method. And here we need to provide our correct path. And we need to include our queries like our category, current page, page size, and API key. So this is how it will look like. So as you can see here, we provide the correct path, and then we specify that the country will be USA, category will be our category, by default it is general, then page will be equal to current page, which is 1, page size will be 20, and then we provide our API key. Here you can remove some parts or you can include something new. It's up to you. So now we have our response, and then we need to create a variable called articles will be equal to response.data.articles, or we can say that by default it will be an empty array. So now let's say set news will be equal to articles. Okay, so let's say set news will be equal to articles, and our total results will be equal to response.data.totalResults or 0. And then when it comes to total pages, we can use this math.ceil function, which returns the smallest integer greater than or equal to its numeric argument. So in this case, math.ceil function rounds up to the next whole number. So if, for example, we have 53 articles and 20 per page, then we will have 3 pages. So we needed to figure out how many pages of news there are in total, and then we just need to display the page correctly, okay? So now we can say that we want to console log our response, okay? And now we need to call this function using useEffectHook. So let's say useEffectHook. And when it comes to the dependency array, we need to call this function whenever category changes or current page changes, okay? So let's save this file. And at the same time, looks like we have an error. Let's open our DevTools, and here we have that useEffect is not defined. Okay, so let's import it. Okay, so let's save this file, and now let's open our DevTools again. And as you can see, here we have our object, and inside this object we have data, and here we have our articles, and inside of these articles we have author, content, description, source, title, URL, URL to image, and so on. Okay, this is how it's gonna look like. So now let's create a header. So let's say header, and inside this header we can create a div, and inside this div let's create h1 tag, and let's say news app. So let's quickly apply some styles. So to this div, let's say that min height will be screen, and background color will be base 200. Okay, so let's save it. Okay, so this class comes from DaisyUI, and as we keep going, you'll understand it better, like what styles and what classes come to us from DaisyUI and which ones are from Tailwind CSS itself. Okay, so to this header, let's say that background color will be primary and text color will be primary content and padding will be 4. So text primary content means that it will look good with this background, so it will contrast with the background. So let's save it, and as you can see, now it is blue and text primary content also looks clear on this background. Now let's say that to this div, we can say that this div will be our container, and then we want to center our container by saying margin to be auto horizontally. And to this h1 tag, we can apply the following styles. Let's say that text will be 3XL and font will be bold. So let's save it. Okay, now it looks much better. Now we can create our main section. So let's say that after this header, we want to create our main section. And inside this section, we can also apply these styles. And at the same time, inside this section, we want to have our categories. So for now, I will just say categories and save it. And here let's also give some padding, which will be 4. So now let's say that we want to create a new component. So inside source folder, we can create a folder called components. And inside this components folder, let's create a file called CategorySelector. Okay, so let's run this command. And now I'm gonna paste some categories that we will have. So these will be our categories, and then let's say that this category selector will accept category and on category change function from its parent, which is app.jsx. Okay, so here to this div, we can apply the following styles. Let's say that it will be flex and justify will be center, so that our buttons will be in the center. Then we can create a div, and to this div, we can apply the following style, which will be btn group. It means that this class will group the buttons. Then we need to map our categories. For that, we can use the word, which will be cat. You can use whatever you want. And here, let's fix this error. Okay, so here, let's say that we want to render button, and each button should have a unique key. So in this case, we can say that each button will be unique, since here IDs are unique, as you can see. And we use this ID. Then we can actually say that inside of a button, we want to display the category name. Okay, and then we can apply the following styles. So let's say class name, and then we want to use curly braces and backticks, and then we can apply a general style, which will be button. I mean a common style, which will be button. And then based on if category is equal to category.id, so if it is true, then we want to apply the following class, which will be button active. If not, we will not apply anything. And here I need to remove this curly brace and put it right here. Okay, at the same time, when we click this button, we need to say that on category change, so this will be the function which will accept. We want to pass the category ID, okay? And that should be it for our component. So now let's save this file, okay? And now inside app.jsx, we need to render this component. So let's say category selector, okay? And now let's say that to this component, we want to pass our category, which will be equal to category. And on category change, we want to pass a function which we haven't created yet, which will be called handle category change. So let's create this function. So let's create it right here. So let's say const handle category change, and it's going to accept new category. Oops, let's say it's going to accept new category. And then we want to say set category to be equal to this new category and current page to 1. So if we are, for example, on business category, and then if we click to health category, of course, we want to be on the first page. So let's save this file. And as you can see, now we have our categories. And you can even see some hover effects. And this is due to the fact that we use DaisyUI. DaisyUI is a Tailwind CSS component library that gives us pre-built styled UI components like buttons, cards, and so on. So it can be very convenient, okay? So now inside this main section, we can wrap this CategorySelector component inside of a div, and under this div, we can create one more div to be able to display total results. So let's create a paragraph, and let's say total results will be equal to total results. So let's save it, and as you can see, total results 35. It is inside general category, but if we go to health, it is 68, and if we go to business, it is 22. Okay, so let's say that to this div we want to say that margin bottom will be 6, and then to this div we can also say that margin bottom will be 6, and to this paragraph let's say that text will be large, and to this div we can also say that text will be center. So let's save it, and it looks better. So now we can show that when we go, for example, to entertainment or to science category, we can show that loading is happening, okay? So it means that under this div, we can create a state where we will say if loading is true, only then we want to show this div. And inside this div, we can have a span tag. And to this span tag, we can apply the following styles. Let's say that it will be equal to loading. So it will be loading, and loading will be spinner. So these classes come from DaisyUI. So if we hover over, you can get additional info, okay? And loading will be large, okay? And to this div, we can say that we want to have our loading in the center. So we can say flex justified to be center, okay? So again, here loading is a base class that activates the loading animation. Then loading spinner specifies the spinner type of loader. They can be loading dots or loading ring, but here we have loading spinner, and loading large just changes the size of the spinner. Okay, so now let's save this file. And now if we go to entertainment, as you can see, we have spinner. And at the same time, our total results change. So if we go to science, again, we have this spinner. And now, instead of this spinner, for example, I can say dots. And let's see what will happen. Let's go to business. As you can see, we had dots. Now I can have ring. Now let's go to health. As you can see, we have this kind of effect. But I will change it back to be spinner. Okay. And then in case of some errors, we can also show the error. So let's say error. So if error is true, only then we want to show this div. And to this div, we can apply the following styles. Let's say that it will be alert and alert dash error. And here we want to actually show the error. So this is again styles which come from DaisyUI. Okay. Now we can do the following. Instead of this key, I will just say something like this. So let's save this file. And now if I refresh the page, as you can see, we see this kind of custom error, and it looks really nice. And instead of using Tailwind CSS sometimes, right, we can just use library like DaisyUI or ChatCN, and then we will be able to save a lot of time. Okay. So now under this error, we can do the following. We want to be able to show our news, okay? So for that, let's say that if loading isn't true, so if loading isn't true, and at the same time, if error isn't true, only then we want to have a fragment, and inside of this fragment, we want to show our news list component. But first of all, let's create it. Inside of these components, let's say that we want to have news list component. And let's create it. Okay. So let's say that we want to have our news list component, and we need to pass to it our articles. So let's see, articles will be equal to news. So let's save it. And here is our component. Now let's get access to our news by saying articles. And let's say that here we want to map our articles. So let's say articles dot map, and here we will have article and index, and then we need to create a separate component which will be NewsCard. So let's create it. Here let's say that we want to have NewsCard component. Okay, now let's use it. Let's import it here. Let's say NewsCard, and to this NewsCard component we need to pass the article itself. So let's say article, okay? And at the same time, we need to assign a unique key to this NewsCard since we have mapping, okay? And index can be used for that purpose. Now let's say that to this div we can apply the following styles. Let's say that it will be grid, and by default grid columns will be 1 on the smallest screens. Then on medium screens and higher, the number of columns will be 2. On large screens and higher, the number of columns will be 3. And gap will be 4. So now let's save this file. And as you can see, we have a lot of NewsCards. Now let's go inside NewsCard and let's get access to the article itself. Okay, let's say that to this div we want to apply the following class, which comes from DaisyUI. It will be card, and background color will be base 100. Again, these styles come to us from DaisyUI, and let's add some shadow, which will be XL. Okay, so let's save it. As you can see, the background color is a bit different. Okay, then sometimes some articles, some news provide images and some images aren't provided. So we need to say if article URL to image really exists, only then we want to display it. Okay, so for that, we can use a tag which will be figure. It is semantically correct to use it. And inside this figure, we can have our image. Okay, so let's save it and see what we will have. And as you can see, now we see images. Now let's go to health. As you can see, it's taken some time. Okay, and now let's go to technology, for example. Great. So as you can see, here the image URL is either invalid or blocked. So that's why in this case we can show the alternative option. Okay, so here first of all what happens is that we make sure that URL to image exists. So if it exists, we intend to display the image. Okay, so since the URL to image exists, we can assume that we will show the image. But as you can see, this image isn't provided, so it may be corrupted or it may be removed. So that's why in this case we can show the article title as an alternative option. There can be a lot of reasons. Okay, and now let's get back to the business, and here we go. Okay, and here let's say that we want to have a div, and to this div we can apply the class which will be card body. And here let's say that we want to have h2 tag and we want to show article dot title. And to this h2 tag we can apply the following class which will be card dash title. So let's save it. Okay, it looks better. Then we need to make sure that there is a source. So we need to say if article dot source exists, then we need to get access to its name. Okay, so only in this case we can show a paragraph and we can say that source will be equal to this source. So let's save it. Okay, and then after the source we can provide the description. It will be article dot description. Okay, it really looks cool. Now let's go to sports. Great. Okay, and under this description we can create a new div, and to this div let's say that it will be card actions, and then we can say that justify will be end and margin top will be 4. So card actions comes from DaisyUI and it's a utility class to group and align interactive elements like buttons or links. And then here let's say that we want to have a tag, and here we can say read more. And let's say that href will be equal to article.url. Okay, then we can say that rel relationship will be equal to no opener and no referrer. Then target will be blank. It means that we will open it in a new tab. And when it comes to the class, we can say that it will be button, and we can say that button color will be primary color. So no opener prevents the new tab from accessing your page, and no referrer hides your site's URL from the destination site. Okay, so let's save this file. And as you can see, now we have this beautiful button. And if we hover over, we can see this nice effect. So let's see it in bigger screen. Okay, it looks really nice. So let's say that we want to open, for example, this news. So let's click it. And as you can see, we have a new tab. And then we are going to this website. And on this website, we can really get familiar with this news. Okay, and it looks really, really nice. So now the last feature that we need to implement in this project is pagination. So let's do it. So let's go to app.jsx, and under this news list, let's say that if total pages is more than 1, only then we can show our pagination. So let's create a div, and inside this div, we need to create our pagination component. So let's say that here, let's create our component, which will be called pagination. Okay, so here let's render it. Okay, and to this pagination, let's see that we want to pass current page. It will be equal to current page. Then total pages, it will be equal to total pages. Then we also need to pass functions to be able to go to the previous page and to the next page. So for that, let's create functions. Let's create a function called handle previous. Okay, so if current page is more than 1, then we want to say set current page -1. Okay, and the same for the handle next function. And then if current page is less than total pages, we want to say current page +1. Okay, so now we need to pass these functions. So let's say on previous, it will be equal to handle previous function, and on next, it will be equal to handle next function. So let's save it. And now inside pagination component, let's get access to them. Let's say that here we want to have current page, then total pages, then on previous function, and on next function. Great. Then we need to understand if the previous button is disabled or the next button is disabled, and in what cases it can be like that. So let's say that const disabled previous. So let's see disabled previous. And when can it be disabled? Only when current page is equal to 1. And disabled next can only be when current page is equal to total pages. Okay, so now we understand it. And let's say that to this div, we can apply the following styles. Let's say that it will be join, which is a class from DaisyUI. Then let's say that it will be flex, and justify will be center. And we can add some margin top, which will be 4. Okay, so if we hover over join, we can get familiar with these styles. So join is applied to a container, and it tells DaisyUI all child elements should be visually joined together. Okay, and as a result, buttons look like one continuous segment control instead of separate buttons. And now let's say that we want to have a button, and to this button, let's say that it will be previous. And to this button, let's apply the following styles. Let's say that here we need to use curly braces and backticks. And first of all, we need to say that it will be join-item class. So it is applied to each child element. So they share borders and look like one connected unit. Okay, I said that join tells DaisyUI that all child elements should be visually joined together. And since this button is a part of this div, we need to say that it will be join item. Then we need to apply the following class, which will be button. And then we need to understand if disabled previous button is true. So if it is true, we need to apply the following class, which will be button disabled. And if it's not the case, we don't need to apply anything. Then on click, we need to call the function, which will be on previous. Okay. Then under this button, we can create one more button, which will be page. Then we need to display our current page of total pages. Okay. And let's say that to this button, we can also say that it will be join item and button, and it should be disabled. So let's say disabled. Okay. And since this button is disabled, we can also apply the following class, which will be no animation. So it means that there will be no animations when we hover or focus this button. And then the same thing should be done for the next button. So let's just copy this, paste it here. And here let's just say disabled next. Here let's say on next. And for the text, let's say next. So let's save this file. And now if we go to the bottom, as you can see, only next button isn't disabled, it means that we can click it. So let's click it. And we still see this news. Okay. Now let's open it on bigger screens. Okay, now let's go to the technology category. Now let's go to the entertainment category. Okay, so here we have this news. We can click them and get additional info. Now if we click, so as you can see, for example, this news doesn't have an image, so we have only text info. Now let's click next. And here we have only 6 news. Okay, yeah, this is how it should work. And now let's see it on smaller screens. Okay. Yes, it looks cool. And it is completely responsive. So that's it, guys. If you find this video helpful, please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel if you haven't done it yet. Thank you, I really appreciate it.